Hello, everyone, and welcome to another episode of the Rational Standard podcast. Today I'm chatting with prominent South African YouTuber Conscious Caracal. It's been a while since we've had the last episode, but we're here to talk about the state of the South African media and whatnot. Conscious, welcome to the podcast.
Oh, thank you very much for having me on.
Can I call you?
Yeah, just to give some context, because this is the second take now of the intro. So yeah, you brought up in the previous in the previous false start about the people that I've talked to. So I've been on stream with Sargon of Akkad, Count Dankula, the Nazi pug guy, Styx Hexenhammer, the Britisher. And I'm quite fortunate that I've been able to network with these people and being able to get in touch with them. And I don't want to call it the intellectual dark web, because that's kind of a cliche term, and it adds a bit too much importance to my role. I've never viewed myself as like an intellectual heavyweight in the online sphere. Like I always tell people, I'm just a guy with a mic. That's how my channel got started, out of just a moment of frustration where I didn't see anyone covering certain issues from a particular angle. And because I saw no one else doing it, I thought, well, I might as well make a video on it. And the immensely positive response I got just set the ball rolling. And since then, I've just been making videos and expanding my reach. And it's the interesting thing about it was I never planned to like make a channel that people care about. And it seems to just people were gravitating to my opinion. And as long as there are people that are willing to listen, then I'll keep making content.
Yeah, I think your success speaks to a little bit of the way in which the South African media is moving. We have an ever-present growing community of YouTubers and podcasters, and this has been alive and well in the UK and the US, but I seriously feel like it's growing a lot more in South Africa, certainly the last 5 years or so. And I think it's quite poignant that you've been able to contact these guys overseas. Now, another thing which we mentioned briefly before we started recording was the fact that your anonymity is quite interesting, because if people are to attack your arguments, they can't attack you based on some kind of identity, unless Caracal is privileged. I'm unaware of that as of yet. Don't know if anyone's called you a privileged Caracal as of now.
No, I haven't heard that one, man.
Yeah, but that's quite an interesting point of view. Can I ask, in your time commenting on certain issues on the internet, do you find that the engagement with the online community is mostly just rotten sort of trolls, or is there a lot of sort of thought that goes into some of the comments on YouTube? I'll tell you briefly from my side. Being at Rational Standard for a few years, unfortunately, a lot of the commenters on our articles, like I would say maybe 70% of them, just sort of see the article, don't read it, and just comment some rubbish. But there are actually a lot of people who I find very, very intelligent, and that's what I've appreciated from the online community.
Yeah, I don't think the real problem is the people themselves. I think you touched on the actual problem right there when you talked about the headline. So in today's modern internet society, people only read headlines. It's actually something that frustrates me quite a bit, where people don't read articles anymore. They just react to headlines. And the media know this. They're not stupid. They know that that a large majority of people only share headlines. So they pick their stories based on what type of headline they can create with that story. A good example is a video I made a while back on when Trump made his tweet about farm murders. So there was this headline that was posted by, I think, Times Live and by News 24 and all these South African news outlets that read, South African farmers tell Trump, leave us the hell alone. So then I saw this headline and it floored me. I'm like, I need to find out more. So I actually read the article, and then I realized, oh wait, they actually just interviewed one guy, but they've used the headline South African farmers plural, but it's just one guy that said, I don't agree with what Trump said, and you should just leave us the hell alone, and that made the headline, which just it just served to actually just delegitimize the media in my mind even further. When I saw it, I could not believe how lazy they were.
Yeah, I mean, that's really disgusting stuff when people, you cannot do that and knowingly think that you are being fair to what the source is saying, or what the sort of general environment is. The only possible way in which you can come up with a headline like that once you've interviewed one guy, is if you have some sort of agenda. So I think these people really know what they're doing, and I think it's an unfortunate part of the fact that a lot of ad revenue comes from just clicks. If these people get more clicks, I'm interested to ask quick. I've got my own opinions on this. Do you think that there are any mainstream media outlets these days which are, respectable? I'm sure there are a few, but certainly in South Africa and the US, it seems that they're just very, very partisan. Would you say there are any sort of neutral mainstream media outlets which you like?
Yes, definitely. There's this outlet called The Rational Standard that I quite like.
We're not neutral.
No. I actually quite like the Politics Web. I have a lot of respect for I'm going to say what he's doing, because it's one guy that's keeping that side up. And I've had so many interesting and thought-provoking articles published by them that I would definitely put them at the top of the list as one of the more trusted and just respected media outlets in my mind in the South African sphere. And the fact that I can't really name someone else, another outlet that I really respect, is quite sad. And it's a testament to the state of the media. The fact that, yes, there are some of them that are like lukewarm, that I can say, okay, about 40% good coverage, but there aren't any that I can say, okay, but these are like at the top. I really like these guys. And I think that's quite telling.
Yeah, and it didn't always used to be like this either. I think there was always polarization. I think media, always had their biases one way or the other, which in my view is not necessarily bad. At the Rational Standard, we make a point of saying we come at things from this perspective. Now, all that does is it leaves it up to the reader to judge the articles accordingly. But the main problem, I'm sure maybe you disagree with me here, and you must let me know, is I just hate it when news organizations say or try to claim to be neutral and try to claim to be independent when you write headlines like South African farmers tell Trump to leave us the hell alone. I just find that absolutely disgusting. Rather be honest about it, in my view.
Yeah, that's exactly the thing. I don't think the problem is bias. I think the problem is actually just not being honest with your audience. So claiming to be a centrist or claiming to be unbiased, I think does more damage than than being biased.
Yeah, I agree with you there, and it's quite a common leftist retort to always say, yeah, but you're biased, and that's obviously true. But
we're all biased.
We're all biased, but the way forward is to judge someone based on what the facts of what they say and not their biases. And likewise, we say we come at this from a certain angle, judge us accordingly. Sort of from that, one particular organization has really been taking a beating. Well, not really taking a beating, but the media has certainly been out to get them, and that's AfriForum. Now, I'm interested to hear, I've developed my own theory as to why this is. Why do you think the media is going after AfriForum so much?
So I always say death always has a cause, and I think there's a myriad of reasons. The main reason I'd say is the fact that AfriForum, the media need to keep their narrative alive. And their narrative is, we have terrible people on both sides. Well, that's kind of true. But at the same time, you don't have a right-wing equivalent of the BLF or the EFF in terms of influence or just in terms of social impact. I mean, a lot of people say, but the RV beer. I mean, like, when's the last time you heard about them? They're practically non-existent. So they need a boogeyman on the right to be able to keep this narrative alive. Like, it's both sides are equally terrible. We're just seeing all these extremists popping up, and I'm biased, but I don't think the right wing has the equivalent of the EFF in terms of influence. And then you have now they're looking for someone on the right that they can say, okay, but this is the right wing equivalent of the EFF, for example, because that takes away, or that serves the left's narrative that they're not really that the cultural zeitgeist and the Overton window hasn't completely jerked to the left in the past few years, which we all can see is what is the case.
Yeah.
So now they identified AfriForum as this EFF or BLF equivalent on the right, and I'm not even this is not something that's implied. This is something that they've outright stated, saying that they are pretty much the same thing. Now, then I ask you the question. I don't see BLF or the EFF going around fixing potholes. I don't see BLF or EFF doing the equivalent of what AfriForum are doing in for example, assisting black farmers in dealing with land invasions, or assisting black or colored people in court cases. I don't see BLF or EFF doing that. I don't see them doing what AfriForum are doing in terms of being a civil rights NGO. And I think, but yeah, that's to answer your question, before I go on a tangent. I think the main reason is to preserve their narrative that, oh no, both sides are equally terrible. We're not going soft on, we're not giving low balls to the one side and giving preferential coverage to one side. We condemn extremists on both sides, and AfriForum are the extremists on the right. So for me, that's the one reason, is the ideological reason. The second reason is just the monetary reason, the clicks. AfriForum are a boogeyman, and the EFF as well to an extent. And the media want extremist organizations because they write headlines. If, for example, that's why the EFF gets so much coverage in the media, even though they're so small in terms of really in Parliament, for example, in terms of seats. They get so much coverage because they make incredible headlines. I mean, you just see it on the front pages. EFF says something incredibly ludicrous, and then people just like, oh, I want to see this. I want to find out what did EFF say this time. And the media, actually, I think the media would have wet dreams about a right-wing extremist group the size of AfriForum that is genuinely radical, because that would give them even more material and even more crazy headlines, and it would even be better, because then you'd be able to sell that fear almost to the majority of South Africans as well, saying, look at all these apartheid apologists or people that want to bring back the past. Look at this crazy thing that they just said. So I do think there's two dimensions to it, to just wrap up my answer. There's an ideological dimension, but there's also sometimes ignored financial reason for the demonization of AfriForum.
Yeah, and what I also see, that's an interesting analysis, because it brings me to think about how many times I see BLF mentioned in the media. The BLF could not be less of an irrelevant organization. I mean, this is probably barely can fill a dinner party, this political party. And they genuinely are crazy. I genuinely think that if they actually hold the political views that they do hold, that they are crazy. I mean, it is just the most egregious stuff on earth. And originally I thought that this was like an act, basically, because they were getting paid by the Guptas. The Guptas have since gone, so it seems to be a little bit more genuine, but still, it's always difficult for me to believe them. But what I often see the media doing, just to get back to the original thing about AfriForum, is that on issues where AfriForum does stuff, for example, farm murders, this is a pet issue which the media always likes to portray as being not particularly important. And the way they do this is they take a moderate position. Like, let's say a moderate position is farm murders are a problem. That's such an ambiguous statement, but I'm sure a lot of South Africans could agree with that statement. So let's say AfriForum says farm murders are a problem. The immediate response from the media is, what do you mean there's a white genocide? That's crazy. So they conflate the most extremist views on the right with very, very moderate issues which people in South Africa who perhaps are more right-wing, I'm using that in the British sense, I'm not saying extreme, care about. And I think this is also part of their political agenda, and this is a very easy way of them to push it. In addition to that, I've noticed one thing in South Africa, and I think we have a group of journalists with blue check marks, maybe not as many blue check marks in South Africa, but regardless, they really like sticking it to people who are successful in this country. I see very, very few organizations which are non-governmental that are very successful that don't get criticized. And I think AfriForum has been enormously successful. I remember reading that their membership numbers increased to a record high after Ernst de Roots gave his speech in Parliament. And AfriForum, in terms of getting new members, in terms of the work they do, like filling potholes and have AfriForum 911, those wristbands, they really are a genuinely good organization which does stuff which improves people's lives. And I think this keeps journalists at News 24 awake at night, and they just can't deal with it.
No, definitely. And to tie into the different angles that people can take. So in the wake of the Arends Roots' Parliament speech, they got these record new. Well, I don't think it's their all-time record, but it was definitely a exceptional month afterwards. But guess what the News 24 headline was? The spectacular unraveling of AfriForum.
Yes, I remember seeing that. I mean, that's just crazy. Like, what are they referring to? And I think what they're talking about is they view Ernst Rutz's speech as being an embarrassment because of the way his MPs reacted to him. What I found quite interesting is that in an interview following that, he himself said, what would have been a failure is if we had gone to Parliament, given our speech, nobody asked any questions, and we just sort of moved along. And that really made me think about stuff for a while. I think the fact that they got the reaction they did for giving the ANC a tongue lashing on the NDR really speaks a lot. And that was really an important point.
He definitely touched a nerve there.
Yeah. Anyway, so that's the media in South Africa, really a bit of a sorry state. Now, to turn a little bit more political, I always like talking to our guests about a pet interesting topic of mine, and that's next year's election. I've been thinking every single day about who I'm going to vote for, on what basis I'm going to vote for. Now, I know you like to keep an anonymous profile, but maybe you can give a few views on a more philosophical level. And in my view, I've become now a single issue voter. Property rights are just so important. That's basically what I'm going to be voting on next year. So I'm interested to quickly ask you, do you think there's any hope for the DA? Open question.
Yeah, the DA, I think the DA is the most schizophrenic political party, or bipolar political party rather, in the South African political sphere.
It's a great description.
They have an incredibly big identity crisis going on at the moment. And I think the main reason for it is the fact that they don't know what they are. They don't know whether they are, as they've been aptly labeled, the ANC light, or if they are a party that stands up for minority rights or for the minorities of South Africa. And you can't juggle those two at the same time. I mean, the best way, or the best example of where this bipolar nature of the DA comes out was in that Parliament meeting with Arends Roots, where they were, and in the aftermath as well. So not only in the Parliament meeting that they told Arends Roots, and I quote directly, I agree with absolutely nothing that you just said. So now let's take that and let's unpack it. What are they actually saying? Firstly, they're coming out in support of EWC. That's a big one. Secondly, they're completely spitting in the face of their commitment to protecting minority rights, or even protecting what's in the Constitution. And then you look at the aftermath. In the aftermath, now if I was to firstly put a little footnote there, if I was a strategic advisor for the DA, I would have told them, yes, Arends Roots is going to speak in Parliament. You need to acknowledge that if he says something that makes sense, for example, his opposition to land expropriation without compensation, you need to acknowledge it. You need to say, okay, you don't have to say, okay, I agree with everything you said, AfriForum is the best, the DA now endorses AfriForum. They just needed to come out and say, Arends Roots made good points. We didn't agree with this and this and this, but on these core issues, he had a valid point. But they didn't, so that's one own goal. Then secondly, they made it worse. So in the aftermath, on social media, 2 DA MPs went out of their way to make sure the South African public understands that they view AfriForum as scum. That they view AfriForum, and quoting one of these MPs that I'm not going to name, and I think everyone that's listening probably knows who it is, said that Arends Roots what he said was a bunch of manure. So that's just a very euphemistic way of saying he was talking absolute bullshit. And I think a DA MP, and then another one chipped in as well, also went on a Twitter, made 20 tweets attacking Arends Roots as well. And I mean, when you see that, and I mean, the AfriForum support and DA support still overlap quite significantly. And seeing the party that you're probably going to vote for and you're an AfriForum member, and you see that party come out and go again out of their way to jump on the AfriForum bashwagon, I mean, that's not a good look. That's terrible optics. That you're basically saying, we're just going to try and be the ANC light. We're not going to look out for minorities. We're not going to support NGOs like AfriForum for X, Y, and Z reasons, even though they are in opposition to land expropriation without compensation. We're not even going to find common ground with them there. I just think it was a absolutely monumental own goal, and it just keeps getting worse. The DA's optics are so bad from my perspective. They seem almost hell-bent on alienating their classical liberal base to an extent, the people that believe in freedom of speech and in property rights and all these very fundamental things. And they're pandering to the identitarians. One moment they're saying, but we're the non-racial party. I think this happened, I can't remember when, but this is also something I told Ronaldo this, because I said that this is another optics blunder. So what happened was they came out, I think it was when the campaign started or something, but it doesn't matter. They came out and they said, and they reaffirmed, we are the non-racial party. We will not stoop so low as to go for racial division and look at people based on their race. Within that same week, a DA MP, I'm not going to name, but you know who it is,
I'm sure
comes out and brings out and starts going on a tirade about white privilege and going on a tirade about how we can't ignore race, about how race is so important that we need to have it interwoven into all our policies. And I mean, then you see this, as a regular South African, as a layman, not someone that is educated in political science, you see this. And what message does that send? Does that show you, or does that look like a party that knows what it is? Or does that look like a party that has internal divisions and internal cleavages that is tearing the party apart almost? It seems, I see a lot of parallels between the DA and the American Democrats to an extent, where there's these two groups. For example, just to take the Democrats as an example, the business liberals or the neoliberals almost, and then there's the progressive bloc. And these two blocs are just drifting farther and farther apart. And the progressives have become increasingly identitarian as well. And you're seeing this exact thing happen in the DA. And I think if they don't start getting their shit together, and if they don't start really reining in some of these rogue MPs, they're not going to collapse, but they're not going to grow either. I think they're going to hover around pretty much 20%, and that's going to be their ceiling.
Yeah, what I'd say is that I would really love for certain DA MPs to just come to terms with their political ideology and join the EFF already. But, you know, it's been interesting. I have spoken to 2 DA members of parliament who profess to be of the classical liberal or libertarian-ish ilk, which very much interested me, because if you look at the way the DA portrays itself in the media, well, not just the media, but also their own press releases and stuff like that, I wouldn't have got that view. So when I talk to these members of parliament, I always say, like, how do you come to terms with having these political views and the rest of your party being so different? And what they kind of say to me, and I'm saying this because I think it could be a genuine argument in their favor, just to give them a fair hearing here, is they say, no, like, even though I'm a classical liberal, I genuinely find that, like, a vast majority of my political views are in the DA's policy platform. It's just that we have to be careful about how we say these things. One MP said, beating the libertarian drum or beating the classical liberal drum will only get you so far. And the view that I've gotten from both of these guys who I've spoken to is that the underlying policy is there. They just have to sort of suck up to the voters with the way they say things. Now, that could easily be true. My view is that you're supposed to sell ideas as being good ideas, and I would much prefer to see that, because let's say people vote for the DA thinking that they're something which they're not. All that will mean is that the DA will get voted out of power one day, and I think that comes down to whether you think the ends justify the means. But you're right, the problem with the party is that it has these rogue MPs, and there's nothing wrong with having variation in the party. There's nothing wrong with having debate. But they need to realize that they're going to lose votes if people who are high profile say stuff like this, and it just goes like this is fine. Everybody can just keep agreeing with each other. You know, I even spoke to a DA MP who said he did not really agree so much with the widespread condemnation of Eros Roots. I wish he had spoken up a bit more. So yeah, it's a very interesting situation. I agree. I think there's a massive identity crisis. But even if it is true that the DA remains a classically liberal party, as these MPs have told me, I find it very difficult to put my support when property rights are on the line, and the most that the party leader can say is, yes, expropriation without compensation is not conducive to a growing economy. It's like, jeepers, man. You can say
yeah,
more.
and then they're presented by an opportunity to be able to demonstrate that they support EWC on a platform, and then they don't take the opportunity. So I only see rhetoric at this moment, and when they are put in a position where they can actually put their neck on the line for property rights, they don't take the chance. So that I judge a tree on its fruits.
Yeah, that's 100% true. Look, I think you can only call 4D chess to a certain extent. I think this is getting to be just a bad game of chess from them. So that sort of begs the question, you know, who to vote for next year. Now, secret ballot, I fully respect that, but this sort of comes down to the way you see the election. Personally, I have to say that I think if it does happen that South Africa removes the property rights clause of the Constitution and we become a disaster, I would like history to look back and see Mosiwa Lekota as being like our shining beacon, like something like Morgan Tsvangirai. Of course, he's not the same thing. Morgan Tsvangirai got beat up because he was a member of the opposition party, but the sort of amount of abuse and just complete rubbish which Lekota has had to go through for defending the Constitution has really been quite amazing for me, and I've gained a great deal of respect for him. His party is the thing which I have a bit of an issue with, but I have a view that the DA needs to get punished, and I think if they lose a few votes, it might be very healthy for them. It might serve to give them a wake-up call.
Yeah, so my logic is I'm looking at the issue philosophically, or just strategically rather. The DA is not going to win the election. They're not going to be the next government of South Africa. So I think if you want to punish the DA, this is the election to do it. It will be the most inconsequential punishment in terms of the result of the election. Yes, they'll lose some parliamentary seats, but at the same time, this is when they need to course correct. This is the make or break moment. If the DA don't course correct now, they're going to be an irrelevant party in 5 years. And I think what needs to be done is they need to realize we need to stick to our rhetoric. Because I always say the partisan DA voter is a myth. It's like a mythical creature. Because you don't see a partisan DA voter that's been like this hardcore DA voter that wears his DA shirt as casual wear. You don't see that because the DA has gone through so many transformations that the guy that was a DA voter in the previous election is now completely alienated probably. But they've gained some other voters as well because of their shifting policies or their shifting worldview. And I think something that's actually to their detriment is their obsession with the polls. The idea of, I know for a fact the DA does extensive polling. I mean, these guys are looking at public opinion polls every second. And I think that's actually not helping them. I think this is one of the reasons for their schizophrenic nature as a party.
Do you think they take polls?
They're just moving with the tides.
Do you think they just take polls and they see, oh, what's popular, we'll say that?
Yeah. It seems to me, from my own personal point of view, it seems to me that they just shift with the tides. They don't really have a foundation. For example, I have much more respect, even though I don't agree with them on much, for the EFF than the DA. Because at least the EFF knows what they are, even though their actions don't reflect it. They stick to their rhetoric. They don't change their rhetoric. They soften up maybe, but their ideology stays solid. And that I can respect.
Yeah, I think I'd have to agree with you there. Well, you're right. I think the term you used there, course correction, is quite a good metaphor for basically what's going on here. It might take a loss of a few votes. As a last little topic to talk about here, what is your prediction for next year's election? It's obviously a long way away, but I quite enjoyed this practice of speculating a bit. You tell me what you think is going to happen, and then I'll tell you what I think is going to happen.
Okay. So I'm probably going to be horribly wrong off the mark, but I'm going to give you my completely honest opinion. I think what's going to happen is I actually I give a lot of weight to the Institute of Race Relations' latest poll. The data seems to me to line up with what I see in the cultural zeitgeist. I think the EFF are going to gain a lot of support. I think they're going to go up to at least 12 or 11%. And I think the DA are going to hover around 20, 22% in that region. And the ANC, I can't say, because historically the ruling party, based on polls, is always underestimated. So I can't really give a prediction on where their percentage of support's going to fall. But I can give you a pretty solid prediction in terms of my own conviction in terms of the DA and EFF, is that the EFF are going to gain, and the DA are pretty much going to stay stagnant, and the COPE is going to gain a few. They're going to gain a few percentage points.
So,
maybe.
So can I ask, do you think the DA is going to go up or down?
They're going to stay in the same place, pretty much the same place.
Okay.
Maybe gain 1%, drop 1%, gain 2%, drop 1%. In that general region, I'll give it a +3 or -3 within that 6-point region. They're not going to gain immensely or drop immensely.
Okay, that's an interesting view. So, it was interesting. The moment Cyril Ramaphosa mentioned expropriation without compensation all those months ago, basically what I thought was quite interesting is that this model of a democracy is quite similar to a lot of things we see in Europe. And what I mean by that is that in Europe, you also have these multi-party democracies where you, generally speaking, have got one big centre-right party, one big centre-left party, and those are generally the only parties that get to form a government within countries. It's like this in the UK. But amongst the smaller parties, usually the third biggest one is a more extreme party on either the left or the right. In Europe, it's mostly right-wing populist parties. But in Africa, we have a similar situation here in South Africa with the EFF. Now, what has traditionally happened in Europe when... so let's say, for example, you have a centre-right party who is losing votes to a more populist right-wing party. What slowly starts to happen is that you'll see that centre-right-wing party attacking with verbal abuse and slurs that right-wing party, calling them racist and, every slur you can think of, while very subtly accepting that populist party's policies, thereby taking the voters back. And I think a perfect example of this was UKIP. UKIP, in the election before Brexit, the general election that happened before Brexit, I think they got 12 or 13% of the popular votes in that UK general election. They had won previously a European Parliament election in the UK, and they were a serious threat to the Conservative Party under David Cameron. And so as a result, David Cameron started to say things like, we need integration among immigrants, and then he called the referendum, and that was a big part of it. He thought, cheapers, if I don't call this referendum, all our Eurosceptic people are just going to vote UKIP, and the Conservative Party will never get back into government. Anyway, so we've seen this model's happened a few times. It's kind of like this in a lot of European countries. And I thought we might see a repeat of that in South Africa, because here we have the ANC, the Left Party, the DA, I'd love to say the Right Party, but it's more like, I'm not really sure where they are party. And the EFF has been banging this drum of EWC, and now all of a sudden the ANC adopts EWC, and that basically would make the EFF irrelevant, but that hasn't happened. So to me, that's a very interesting turn of events, and I'll give you my prediction. I think the ANC, if I had to put money on it, I'd say they'd drop, but only slightly, not that much. I think the EFF is going to go up, and I think the DA will drop, but also only by a percentage or two. But I think they will drop. That's my prediction. Yeah.
Right, that makes sense to me. It still makes sense in my framework of prediction as well. I also think, I can't give you an ANC percentage, but I do think they're going to drop a little, and that drop are either going to be people that don't vote or people that go to the EFF. Not for any reason are those people going to go to the DA, I reckon.
Yeah.
They're either going to go EFF or they're not going to turn out to vote. And you can just look at the past as well in terms of how the ANC's drop in support and the DA and EFF's gain. The majority of the just by the deduction or logic, it seems to me that the EFF are gaining much more from disenfranchised or alienated ANC voters than the DA are. That should worry the DA quite immensely.
Yeah, for sure. Cool. This has been an interesting conversation. I'll be a short one, but thanks very much for coming on the show, Conscious Caracal, and I wish you all the best in your endeavors on YouTube. I'll certainly be listening.
No, thank you for having me on, and I hope we can have another conversation in the future. I look forward to talking to you a bit more politicking with you in the future as well, man.
Yeah.
And you're also welcome to come on my show. I'm a bit booked at the moment for not only with guests but also with real life obligations. But the invitation stands for somewhere in the near future.
Well, I appreciate that very much, especially when you're rubbing shoulders with people like Count Dankula and Sargon of Akkad. It's pretty cool, actually. I don't know about you, but one thing I'd just like to mention in closing is that since starting this podcast, I've been really happy at how, what's the word again? How accessible people are. Even though a lot of people have got like hundreds of thousands of followers on YouTube, a lot of times you just send an email, you just send a message, and all of a sudden I got them on my podcast. I think that's a really fantastic aspect of this. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Rational Standard podcast. You can find our articles at www.rationalstandard.com. Give us a like on Facebook and subscribe to our podcast on iTunes or listen to the episodes online at Peeper. In addition to that, you can join our mailing list at rationalstandard.com, or you can find me on Twitter at Nick Babaya or at Rational Stand. Stay tuned for the next episode.